Hello and welcome to the Sacred Flame podcast. I am your host, Mathias Nordvig, educator in all things Scandinavian, Nordic, and even Arctic at the University of Colorado Boulder. And we are joined by our new co-host, Amina Otto. Amina, just give us like a single line about how cool you are.
Hi everyone, I'm Amina, former student of Matthias and current PhD candidate at the University of Glasgow, learning about all things Nordic, Celtic, and pre-Christian.
Boom, there we go. Well, thank you for once again joining me on the podcast. As you listeners may have heard last episode, but I just want to recap. We're doing a new concept, a new with a co-host, and we're going to be talking about all things pre-Christian and interesting in the Northern European realm. We're not going to be limited just to Scandinavian Nordic stuff. We will also branch out into the Celtic stuff because that's what you know a lot about, Amina. And we will also dip our toes into the Slavic and sort of Finno-Ugric Baltic corner of things because I also know about that, of course. I'm not like a super expert, but I do know things here and there. Um, and yeah, we can also once in a while talk a little bit of Arctic culture. But yeah, so overall, that is the new format for this podcast. I'll probably keep introducing it a couple more times um, as we progress until everybody has gotten it.
Yes,
Um,
give them a chance to get used to me.
yeah, and we're still in October. And we will still be talking about rituals and traditions of the dark times. We started this last time with, I guess like sort of an overview of some of the important things, and I think we're going to get more deep into some thoughts and ideas that people seem to have had in the Nordic realm, Northern European realms, um, on the goddess of the underworld and other death traditions and stuff that would be relevant for this time of year. But first, I mean, we have to recognize that we're coming up on Halloween, which means in America, pumpkin stuff everywhere. Amina, what's your opinion about pumpkin spice?
I think you can have too much of a good thing. I think pumpkin spice has its place. But I do remember when I was living in Boulder, I'd walk into Trader Joe's at the beginning of September and it was like a pumpkin vomited in there. Everything was bright orange and pumpkin flavored. And I think we should apply pumpkin spice judiciously, but not feel shame in enjoying it.
I think that sounds reasonable. I actually don't know what pumpkin spice is. I have never tasted anything with pumpkin spice in it. Well, I mean, I don't know if you put pumpkin spice in like pumpkin pie, maybe I've had it like once, but
If you've
I don't.
had pumpkin pie,
Okay,
that's the exact flavor profile that people are trying to achieve with pumpkin spice.
I see.
So,
Okay, yeah.
yeah, that kind of warm, cinnamony, cardamomy, clovey, maybe
Mm,
clovey, but those kind of warming spices, that sweet
right.
kind of, it's everything that you would associate with autumn smells as well.
Hmm.
So it is quite seasonal.
Yeah,
But yeah, so if you've had a pumpkin pie, you've basically had the peak of pumpkin spice anything.
right. Yeah, okay. So I've had that once in my life because
There you go.
did not sit well with me that night. I was like, the consistency of this pie is off.
Oh, well, then
So
you must have had not very good pumpkin pie, and you should try
maybe,
it again.
I don't know. Sorry, America, but yeah. But
That's
it's the reason I'm also asking is because a friend of mine just sent me some kind of pumpkin spice meme, and my response was, "I don't understand this." And they were like, "Why don't you understand this?" And I'm like, "Go to Scandinavia and see all the weird things that we do with licorice, and you wouldn't understand that either, right?" Like so. Um, That's an important part of this
Disgusting.
as well. Yeah. Oh yeah. I know how much you hate black licorice. So
Oh, it's so foul. I'll stick to my North African licorice. Thank you very much.
so the the only time I have not liked black licorice in something was that one time I found chips with black licorice on them. So
As in
like
potato chips.
as in potato chips. Right?
Sorry, that was
I
a
mean just
horrible
like the
sound for everyone
yeah.
listening, but that's my reaction.
And I think it's justified because I was like, I was like, oh yeah, black licorice on chips. Wow, this is foul. Holy shit.
That's truly. I mean, no, I think that's a perfect comparison to pumpkin spice because you do find pumpkin spice in absolutely everything, and it is horrifying.
Yeah,
It
just
doesn't
just
need to be that ubiquitous.
no, no. There's just some things that don't need to be touched by pumpkin spice, just like it
Yes,
doesn't need to be touched by licorice either. So
exactly.
I'm glad we got that out of the way.
No, it's really a problem. It's creeping into the UK as well. You
Mm,
do see everyone doing kind of their own take on pumpkin spice lattes. It's not quite to the degree of the States, but you are seeing more pumpkin spice scented candles and maybe some baked goods here and there. So it's still like kind of an acceptable level, but it's only a matter of time.
yeah, no, I don't know what that looks like in mainland Europe, but you know what? I would say that a lot of the same like flavors though is what we get in the seasonal drinks that you get at Christmas markets and stuff like that. The
Yeah, I think it's
Glühwein
very
and
similar.
Glögg and
Yep.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Le vin
So,
chaud, as we
yep.
say in France. Yep, or glögg. I love glögg.
Mhm.
They make it
Mhm.
very alcoholic in the UK.
Oh yeah, I'm
It's
sure.
delicious. But yeah, same, basically identical sort of spice profile to that. And that carries you right through the winter as well. So from about mid-September through mid-January, you've got
Hmm.
those very cozy flavors just popping up everywhere.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
packaging just goes from orange to red and green.
Right, yes. Okay, well, enough of weird spices. Let's talk about the underworld. Because yeah, I mean, last time we talked about, some rituals and conceptions and so on, but what is like the underlying theme here, I think is might be the more interesting conversation to have this time. Um, and it has something to do with, relations to the dead and the goddess of the underworld as well. Um, so, uh, Amina, you mentioned Freyja last time and how she takes half of
Yes,
the slain.
she
And
does.
yeah.
So she is, oh, in addition to being known as Vanities, I meant to say this last time as well, and I think I got sidetracked, but one of her other names is Valfreyja.
Mhm.
And as we know from other instances, such as Valkyriur and Valföður as a name for Odin, Valraven, we know that that means the slain. It's dealing with the dead. So Valfreyja is the Freyja of the dead. She's the chooser of the slain just as much as Odin and his Valkyriur are. So she gets to take her pick of the dead. I think she, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I think she gets the first pick of the dead.
It doesn't really say.
It doesn't. Okay.
There's one single reference to this idea that's in Grimnismal, right?
Yeah.
Where we have the mention of her abode Folkvanger, and
Hmm.
then it says and she takes half of the slain, Odin takes the other. And I
Yeah.
guess the idea that she gets first pick is because perhaps she's mentioned first
She's just
and
mentioned
then
first.
Odin
Okay.
gets the
Yeah.
other. But that's an inference that people can make if they
Yeah.
think they want to, but it's not necessarily you know what people might have thought back then. I don't know. But yeah, nonetheless, she is like in charge of half of the slain or half of the dead.
Mhm.
Um, And there's also like a cool little thing to consider, and that is, in the original source that talks about her hall, Grimnismal, or the Speech of Grimnir.
Hmm.
Um, that's the one that Snorri Sturluson has then quoted in the Edda, which is where he then also says that her hall is called Sesgrimnir.
Yes.
Yeah, so that means something like a place with room for a lot of seats, essentially. Um,
The seat room, the sit room,
this, yes, the
room for
sitting.
sitting,
But
the
here's the cool
parlor.
thing, the parlor. But here's the cool thing about it, though. It might actually originally have been a ship.
Yes, and that speaks to a lot of burial practices that we have, and some of the most magnificent examples of furnished graves that we get from Scandinavia are ship burials. And you also see these stone arrangements that are shaped not like circles, but in the shape of a ship. You get that nice oblong kind of lemon form of
Hmm.
these stones that's mimicking what you would expect to see for a ship as well.
Yeah,
So there's
yeah,
clearly this relationship
yeah.
between the dead and ships and Freyja.
Hmm.
So we can say a lot about the dead and ships. And
um, Speaking about North Africa, isn't there also a connection between ISIS and ships?
yes, well, I'm so glad you asked this because I just had the opportunity to go to my homeland, the motherland of Egypt, and visit the brand new Grand Museum in Cairo,
Hmm.
which will have an entire section dedicated to, they're called sun ships or soul ships, that were these sort of lightly made barges that were meant to go into the afterlife with the dead.
Hmm.
And I believe there is a connection with Isis and these ships, but also some other deities were involved as well. And that's why you find all of these really magnificent Egyptian graves, is because they were expected to bring everything into the afterlife with them, often with the aid of these ships. It was supposed to
Hmm.
help them cross into the afterlife, into the other world, and bring them in kind of a like a Stygian tradition
Hmm.
to where they were going to be judged and allowed or not allowed into the eternal bliss of those who deserved it.
And you know what? It's almost as if it's kind of similar in the north, and maybe, just maybe, there's a connection here. And before anybody goes like, no, totally not," because like that's just not possible. Let's just keep in mind that the geographical distances between Scandinavia and North Africa are not that far, and people have made it back and forth between those two areas. It on occasion, maybe even quite often, since pretty much forever ago. Um,
Yes.
we can mention, for instance, the glass bead trade that goes from Cairo to
Hmm.
Scandinavia in the Bronze Age. So that would be
Yes.
over 3,000, nearly 4,000 years ago. We
And
can, of course,
the
yeah.
amber trade as well, going
Oh,
from the
yes.
north down to the south. So
Yes, we
there
also
were,
have
yeah.
that. We can also, of course, mention that this was an unproblematic thing for Vikings to do as well. They found themselves in Greece and
Mhm.
elsewhere in the Mediterranean at times. So it's not improbable to consider an exchange of ideas, or just, the slow spread of a certain perception of the underworld and goddesses and stuff like that, taking a route north from that region at some point either. And this is where there are actually some very concrete examples of that. One of them is the tumulus graves, these burial graves, or burial mounds. And some of them, the earliest ones, seem to have been communal, where this would be like in the agricultural Stone Age, where families, clans, whatever, were buried in them. They are spreading from the Mediterranean up along the Western European coast and end they're spread in Scandinavia. So that's the first one that we see. Then we have, other types of burial mounds like the kurgans that we know from the Russian Siberian inland. They're younger and they're also spreading into Central Europe and end up in Scandinavia as well. And that all converges in sort of like a particular Scandinavian version of all of this.
Yes.
But adding to this, there's of course also the fact that during Roman times, we then have the spread of the particular ISIS cult actually
Yes.
into what is
It
now
was
modern day Germany and
very
Netherlands.
popular all kind of through that big middle swath of continental Europe.
Hmm.
And these secret cults had a heyday
Yep.
in, kind of like just before from quite early on until just before and just after the collapse of the Roman Empire. And a lot of
Hmm.
them survived outside of the Mediterranean milieu for quite a long time after Roman influence had kind of ebbed from that region. So it's not too far to think that a lot of these influences that we see of mother goddesses or goddesses ruling over a land of the dead or having connections to ancestors and underworld would have maybe if not originated in the Mediterranean, at least been passed from there to the north very
Hmm.
early on. And then those traditions would have been maintained for many, many centuries.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we even so there are some things in the archaeology that seem to actually align with this. For instance, we have there have been finds of little golden boats, for instance,
Mm.
from the Danish and Dutch area, if I remember correctly, which sort of like seem to mirror the idea of the sun boats. And Nehelenia, a particular local Dutch female deity, has also been theorized to be sort of like a local version, a local Germanic version of Isis, actually. So it's
Ah.
not totally bonkers to suggest connections here.
Mhm.
They are actually quite plentiful, which I just think is kind of interesting and cool.
It's very
Um,
interesting and cool.
yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be said also about like Easter and the Matroni, which is a totally different conversation. But again, going back to that tradition of these goddesses and these sort of Isis-like figures or Ishtar-like figures, and not saying Easter's Ishtar, don't, that's not what I'm saying. But
No, please
that's
don't.
a very complicated discussion.
There's a bunch of nerds that are going to come after you if you
Yeah,
do.
I know. I'm not saying that, but these kind of like very powerful feminine deities, um, and these kind of Greco-Roman traditions being mashed together and turned into very localized traditions as they move north and
Hmm.
as they get even into Britain and Ireland. You have
Hmm.
like Brigantona, who is kind of like the grand goddess of the Celts, and she is reflected in a lot of the Welsh literature as Rhiannon.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
you have a bunch of really interesting female deities that are kind of reflections of that tradition as well, and a lot of the later Celtic traditions.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also this is a weaker link, but nonetheless quite interesting to consider. We have that Minoan goddess in Minoan Bronze Age, which I think we're like closing in on like 5,000 years ago, more or less.
Hmm.
I'm a little iffy on the timeline here, but this depiction of a female deity that holds two snakes on her arms
Yes.
and her titties out too, like their breasts out. And we have a similar type of depiction in Scandinavia from a picture stone in Sweden where a very clearly female deity is sitting with her legs spread open, by the way, and
Hmm.
then holding these like snakes in her hands. And this is where I think there might be an interesting connection to the Wild Hunt because that
Hmm.
wild hunt guy Folma that I mentioned last time, he sometimes in Danish and Swedish folklore is actually pursuing a female figure of some kind. She's
Yes, that's
uh,
quite common in wild hunt tales and also sovereignty myths, Celtic
yeah,
sovereignty myths. You
yeah,
often have to chase down the sovereignty goddess and sleep with her, and then you get to be king.
yes,
And those are
yes.
very much related to the wild hunt and this pursuit of a female entity of some kind, whether she's an otherworldly woman, or she's almost always an otherworldly woman, or a goddess, a named goddess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you get inversions of that in things like Diana and Actaeon, where the hunter
Mm-hmm.
becomes the prey and is pursued by his dogs because he wronged a woman. So,
Yes. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, no, and that's also there's with these Scandinavian versions, there's that direct link that she has a not particularly flattering name in Danish, which goes Sletten Langpatte, which means floppy long titty.
yeah, well,
Because,
she I think this must have been when I was reading on Scandinavian versions of the Wild Hunt, but to talk about how she has to like throw her breasts over her shoulder in
yes.
order to run so she doesn't
Yeah.
trip on them.
Yes, and I do apologize to everybody who didn't expect to get into some kind of like weirdly close to not safe for work conversation about folklore here,
Yeah.
but yeah, so she feeds according to the folktales, she feeds fish or sometimes actually snakes with her breasts.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's like the fascinating little like connection that seems to be popping up here between those depictions too. So that I don't know if there's like any direct or maybe more convoluted connections to deities like Isis, but it is interesting to consider this particular female deity in that particular role. It has something to do with life and death, and we can even, extrapolate from the notion of like this underworldly or otherworldly female figure having two children.
Hmm.
That this could also be the underlying pattern behind the story about Balder and Höder,
Hmm.
and the reproductions of those stories in Northern European Germanic um, folk tales and mythologies. And um, I mean, there's also plenty of theories around how that story also has links to Celtic myths and stories as well.
Oh yeah, you have the story of Macha, this woman who this otherworldly woman who decides to marry this really basic guy, and she gives him one rule. She says, "Don't tell anyone about me." And he says, "Okay." And then he immediately goes to a feast and brags about what good of a runner his wife is. And so he comes home to his very pregnant wife, who's pregnant with twins, and he he says, "I'm so sorry. I went to the king's feast and I told everyone what a good runner you are, and I accidentally mentioned that you might be able to outrun the king's new horses. So now you have to race the king's horses." So she goes, races the king's horses, gives birth to twins. Oh, she wins the race, by the way. She gives birth to twins, dies immediately, and curses the men of Ulster with a really interesting curse where they will suffer the pangs of childbirth for 9 days and 9 nights when their land needs them the most, and this curse will last for 9 generations. And this is one of the Remshela of the Toyn. But again, you have this otherworldly woman giving birth to twins under interesting circumstances, and hijinks ensue.
Mhm.
And the name Evan Macha is the place. It's the name of the place of power of the region of Ulster, which figures hugely in Irish legends and mythologies. But the name has caused a lot of controversy. It's sometimes translated as the twins of Macha. It's sometimes translated as the plane of Macha. It's very ambiguous in that way. So again,
Mm.
just to add another twin myth in there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then we should of course not like skip the whole number nine thing either, right? Like,
Yes.
nine nights and all that kind of stuff,
Nine
which,
nights, 9 days,
you
nine
know,
generations.
yes, and we see that in the Scandinavian material all the time as
Yep.
well, right? Like,
You've got Odin hanging on the tree. You've got 9 underworlds actually in
yeah.
Vafthrudnismal.
Yes, is it Vatnsmál, or I mean we
It's
have
Vaft.
Neo-Heimar in Völuspá in the Prophecy of
Hmm.
the Seeress. Um, does he actually mention the nine
He
underworlds?
does mention nine
Mhm.
underworlds. He says, I can say this because I've passed through the nine.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's where he got the
Yeah.
knowledge of the Jotun,
Yeah.
or the Jotnar. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. He does mention those nine underworlds. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we have the nine underworlds. We have Dreipnir, which is a little more like
Mhm.
iffy because it's like it 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 drips a new version of its what is it? It drips a new version of itself every 8 nights or something like that.
I think it I can't remember if it's just one new version of itself or 8 new
Yeah,
forms of
it
itself, so
might
that
be it
there
might be
are
eight
nine of them.
actually.
I don't know.
Yeah,
And
is
then
it?
we also have the sacrifices that were happening of 99 of everything every
Hmm.
9 years. Nines are just all over the shop.
Yeah, every nine
Yeah.
years, and we have even that like that the rune stone from Stentoften in southern Sweden, where he mentions this guy whose name is Hatwolf. He mentions having sacrificed nine rams and nine
Yep.
stallions to give a blessed year.
So that was
So
with
yeah,
Freyja.
yeah, it's all over the place,
Yeah.
and there are all of these different connections, and then of course we have later, both in the English material and in the Scandinavian, particularly the Danish material, and then later on also in the Icelandic material, references to the nine Nøðir, the nine N runes,
Yeah.
right?
The nine nose runes.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and they have some kind of connection to healing and possibly also death, right? So we see is it the Canterbury charm? Help me out. It might be the Canterbury charm that mentions
No, that you've
the North's nine sisters. It's a reduction spell that basically just reduces to zero at the very
Yes, and
end.
then you write it. So you start out writing it 9 times, then 8 times, then 7 times.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah, and it's supposed to
Yeah.
reduce it.
It might not be
I
the Canterbury spell. It could be another one, but it's one
have
of
a
these.
book
Yeah, I
that will
also have
tell me
one. Yeah.
right there.
And the cool thing about it too is that it's very clearly so it is actually written in West Saxon, but it is very clearly it has Scandinavian origin because the writer calls it North instead of Mead. Right, and
Yes.
North is the Scan. It would be like the essentially the West Saxon pronunciation of Scandinavian at the time.
Yeah, it would have
So
undergone that vowel mutation.
yeah, if it was
Yeah.
originally West Saxon, it would be
Yep.
spelled with a long Y, or
Hmm.
what basically is a double E today, right?
Yeah,
Um,
me.
yeah.
But
So that's quite fascinating. In Denmark from the 1300s, we have a spell where um, this is a spell to give you um, basically the capacities of being a doctor. Um, and the person who says the spell then also at some point says, "I know a stone that is called black, and it stands in the ocean, and on it lies the Nynaeve." Um, and it's like, what? What is this?
what does that mean?
What's the point?
I mean, that's not. You've got, is it Raun who has 9 daughters, and
Yes, yeah,
yeah, you've
yeah.
got, so that's another,
I mean,
that's
Heimdallr has
Heimdallr's
nine
mothers.
mothers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
9 mothers.
And
And
then
that's the only nine plus ocean reference I can think of off the top of my head. But
yeah,
that's
yeah,
really interesting. The nine needs stand on that black rock in the ocean. I'm not
yeah.
sure. I'll have to.
I
You
think
need to
it's sort of
release
like a
your rune
banishment.
book, Matthias. Yeah.
Yes, I do. I do need to get on that. If my publisher is listening, I'm just about to send an email. Um,
Sorry.
and then yeah, so and then we have from the 1500s in Iceland, we also have a spell to basically, and again, I apologize for getting into the nether realm of things, but to make somebody have like massive diarrhea.
Oh yeah, the fart
Yeah,
runes.
the fart
Fart
runes.
stavir. Yeah.
Yeah, which
Oh, those are
also
so
mentions the
fun.
nine Nordics, right?
Yes.
So a long-standing concept, but this really brings it all back to this. It seems to be centered around the notion of illness,
Hmm.
either curing illness or causing illness, and
Yeah.
that, of course, also, you know, hovers right around the subject of death, right, and the underworld.
Yes.
So the nine Neither might actually have something to do with the underworld too, you
Hmm.
know. So
Yeah.
I think that's quite interesting and fascinating. But yeah, let's get back to this idea of speaking of runes, right? Because one of the things
Mhm.
that you need to do to learn the runes is, of course, to go through some kind of underworldly process, right?
Yeah.
And and this is where we get that situation of a some kind of dude who might want to become king, for instance, and therefore has to interact with a lady of the underworld. What is that all about, Amina?
So that can be about a lot of things. In many traditions, including Celtic, you do get a lot of these sovereignty myths. They've kind of been lumped together as any instance of a legend where someone is doing exactly that, where someone is copulating with an otherworldly woman who represents the landscape or the land, and through that union is tying himself to it, therefore giving himself authority over the land and putting himself in a proving himself worthy to rule it.
Hmm.
So uh, this can be done through meetings this woman at a well. This can be done by this woman deciding to become your wife and you having to prove yourself worthy to be with her. This can be done through pursuing usually a white animal and chasing her. And then once you catch her or kill her, you discover that she is a woman, and then she turns into
Mm.
this beautiful maiden
Isn't that
who
what
represents the
Pwll
land. Hmm?
Pwll isn't that what Pwll does?
I don't know.
Maybe I'm mispronouncing his name. Um,
Are you thinking of push?
yes, exactly. Hey, man,
Push.
it was kind of
Okay.
close.
Yes. So push.
Pwll.
I'm so glad you brought up push because this brings up three of my favorite things to talk about when it comes to other worlds and underworlds. So we have a
Boom.
sovereignty goddess.
Yes.
We have an otherworld king who also ties into Wild Hunt. And we have a magical mound to go back to this idea of burial mounds, because those are tied very much to the underworld, not only as holding the dead, but also as kind of inviting magic into our world.
Mm.
So, yeah, the story of Pwll or Pwll. I was so confused. I was about to be so embarrassed if I didn't know what you were talking
No,
about. But
I'm
yes,
just glad that it's for once somebody laughing at me when it comes to languages.
yeah, that's Welsh. And I will say, switching between Welsh and Icelandic is not fun because that
No,
double L sound does change quite a bit. So, yes,
yeah.
Pwll or
Push.
Pwll,
Yes.
Pwll.
Yes.
Yes,
I'll let you pronounce that from now on.
Pwll. You just point to me. We need a signal. Pwll. So,
Push.
yeah, he's a guy who befriends an otherworld king in kind of the first episode of his story called Aron, whom he meets while hunting. He ends up feeding his pack of dogs on a stag that Aran's otherworldly hounds, the Kunanun, the
Mm-hmm.
hounds of Anun, has brought down, which is a big discourtesy. So in order to regain the friendship of Aran, they trade places for a year, and Pwll kills this guy that Aran is unable to kill. And because of that, they now have this established friendship, and they both benefit from it. So Pwll gets all these really cool otherworldly riches and friendship with Anun, or Anufin, as Aran's realm is sometimes called. And Aran gets this guy killed for him, which helped him politically a lot.
Mm-hmm.
In the second episode of Pwll's story, he after a feast, he decides to go sit on this massive hill called Gorsedd Arberth. And Arberth is his principal court in the land of Dyfed. Gorsedd is a really interesting word, which there's been a lot of scholarly discussion about, but we can translate it as basically mound. And it's exactly the same as a she mound or just a she in Irish tradition. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
she can mean mound or the people who live in the mound, or
Mm-hmm.
peace when
Okay.
translated from Irish. So if you
Ah.
sit on one of these things, something fantastic will happen or you'll die.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's
or
exactly like
stuff
this
like
the Nordic versions of that
yeah,
story, right?
exactly. Like
Yeah.
Draugr might come get you, or you might get
Yeah.
superpowers. It's
Yeah. Or the
never, there's no
trolls will
middle
come from
ground.
all sides, you know. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
he decides to go, he risks his life and he sits on this mound with his retinue and he sees this beautiful woman on a horse, but he can't catch her because she's
Mm-hmm.
magical. And this
Yes.
is Rhiannon. And Rhiannon
Mm-hmm.
says when she finally allows Pwll to catch her, I was actually looking for you and I think we should get married. And he goes, well, wonderful, let's get married. So they set their date, and I won't get into all of it, otherwise we could be here all night. But they set their date. Pwll messes up royally during their wedding, and Rhiannon has to get him out of a lot of trouble. But they end
Mm-hmm.
up married, and I would say happily ever after, but not quite, because the third movement of the story deals with Rhiannon's calumniation. And
Yes.
this is a really cool word that means something really not cool. It basically means when a woman is blamed for and punished for a crime that she did not commit. So
Mm.
those are the three movements of this story of Pwll Pendevic Dyfed and his interactions with the underworld and otherworld.
Yes.
And it's got everything you could want, like magic
Yes.
mounds, a guy gets stuffed in a bag and beaten almost to
Right.
death.
That's right. Yeah.
You've got a mysterious claw creature that steals horses. It's everyone
Right.
should go read
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that story.
Mhm.
That was, that was one of the stories that I was raised on as a kid.
Yeah.
So yeah. And I
So who
mean,
told you it was pronounced Pwll? Because
uh,
I would really
that
like to know that.
so yeah, so that would be the Danish translator of the story, right? Because in the um that there's like a pronunciation guide in
Ah,
right in the back of the book, and yeah, the Danish attempt to reproduce the Gaelic sounds is that. I'm not gonna
no,
ever
that's
say it
fair.
again. Okay, so that brings us to another thing, right? And that is, of course, the Arthurian legends, because that's also a lot about mounds, right? Like, so one of the things that we, run
So many
into,
mounds.
yes, one of the things that we run into with Arthur, and his knights around the round of the round table, or his retinue, depending on versions and all that kind of stuff, right? Is it like some shepherd is like hanging out, and then he like there's a mound over there, and there's an opening in the mound. Let me just check what's happening in there. Oh shit, it's Arthur, right? Like and that's the sleeping giant, right? That's the
Yes.
sleeping warrior giant that is known throughout Europe. Dietrich of Berne would be the primary one, and that's Theodoric the Great, right? So
Mhm.
the old Gothic king of northern Italy in the 500s, who's also mentioned on the Rök runestone from the 800s in Sweden, by the
Mhm.
way, for some reason. He became a folktale,
Yeah.
Arthurian folktale in the same way, right? He lives in a mound, and then he will come out of that mound one day. And here's the really cool weird thing about these folk tales about that sleeping giant. We have Olga the Dane as well,
Hmm.
right? Who is really weird because he first appears in the Chansons de Geste, right? So he first appears in French medieval French literature as Ogier le Danois, I think is what they call him, right? And there are different versions of his story. Either he is a son of a Lombardic king who is like fighting Charlemagne, and then
Hmm.
later on becomes Charlemagne's buddy, or he starts out as Charlemagne's buddy, and then they get they fall out, they have a falling out, and in some versions, Charlemagne's son kills Ogier's son, and in other versions, Ogier gets like captured by Saracens and fights the king of India or some giant in India, or it
Happens to a
all
lot of people back then.
right, like it's just all over the place.
So you gotta watch out for those Saracens. They're snatching people up. But
So,
yeah.
so like there's like so many different versions of it, but in one of these versions, he actually ends up in England, where
Hmm.
he then marries the Morgan, which is just interesting.
That's very interesting. How does
As
that go for him?
I think that actually turns out quite well. But it's like again, this is where he then also enters the mound and then goes to sleep.
Yeah.
And in the Danish and Swedish versions of this story, he either sleeps in a mound somewhere in Sweden, or he sleeps under the Danish castle of Kronborg.
Hmm.
And this is where you can, go to the castle Kronborg today in Helsingør, north of Copenhagen, and see a statue of him. He's not obviously not there because it's folktale, but there's a statue of him, and so it's like there are like all of these really fascinating folk tales that are just like spread all over an area that encompasses northern Italy, Germany,
Hmm.
France, the Netherlands, Britain, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Iceland, because the Icelanders have Dietrich of Berne in their
Hmm.
own versions. Of course, we have that in Norway as well. And then we have these Danish, Swedish folk tales about Olga the Dane. And then we also get interesting Slavic versions of this story.
Hmm.
The founding father of the Czech Republic. There are some interesting crossovers here where the founding um, uh, of the uh, of the country happens from a mountaintop, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this one as well, but the mountain is called Rizhip or something like that, and that is a Czech version of a Germanic word. And attached to these stories, we have Václav, the patron saint of the Czech Republic, who also sleeps in a mound or in a cave with a retinue and will come out. And
Hmm.
in one of my previous episodes of the Sacred Flame, the defunct episodes that you can find on Patreon, I mixed that story up with the founding of Prague, where you have Prague
Hmm.
founded on the Mound of Vyšehrad. Um, and then we have, of course, and now it gets really interesting when we talk about like underworldly figures and mythological figures. The founding of Krakow in Poland, right? That is this hero named Krok, who's, by the way, also credited with founding Prague in Czechia. Um, Krok, he vanquishes a dragon called the Wawel dragon, and then he builds his castle on the Wawel mound, and that becomes Krakow. And uh, the what seems to be the best explanation for Krok's name is actually that it means raven or crow.
Ah,
Yeah, and so now we can come full circle
now it
to
comes all the way back.
yes,
Yeah.
to that guy that we know who in the Nordic myths, right, goes into a mountain, right,
Hmm.
and copulates with the warden of the underworld, who in this context is called Gunnlöd, Suttung's daughter, and that's how he gets the wisdom, the mead of poetry that he then brings
Yep.
back, right? So Odin. Now, like there's just like so much fascinating crossover here between all of these folk tales, and they all seem to rely exactly on that like blueprint that you just sketched out before with this hero or cultural hero or
Hmm.
king who who has to either marry or copulate with um this lady of the underworld, this lady of the
Hmm.
other world, right? um they seem to have stepped a little bit in the background when we get to like Olga the Dane stories, and except for like you have that reference to when he marries the Morgan, and then
Yeah.
they seem to
Who
be
is also
almost
very strongly associated with ravens, by the way.
yes, by the
Um,
way, right?
yeah.
And then they seem to be almost disappeared. The woman seems to have almost disappeared in context of the Slavic stories, right? But there are
Mhm.
other, by the way, there are other founding myths in the Slavic realm that actually even more involve women as well. So it's not the like they completely disappeared, but it's just
Mhm.
fascinating to the note that we
It's
have
really
like
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
um, and so that brings us to that question, like what does that lady of the underworld have? Like what can she do?
Oh, she can do a lot. Mostly she has knowledge that we cannot access. And that is a big theme that you see throughout. So she has either foreknowledge, so prophecy. She has knowledge of how to fix a situation, as you see a lot with Rhiannon and with some other sovereignty ladies and otherworldly ladies who are constantly saving these quite mediocre men from situations of their own making. I could go into the lay, some of the Lay de Marie de France. Her lay L'Enval has a
Mm,
very similar situation to Pwll. And the guy from who was married to Macha of
hmm.
Evan Macha. So this idea that these otherworldly or underworldly women seem to know something that mortals, especially mortal men, do not have access to is a very strong theme. Sometimes they can change shape. The Morrigan is a famous shapeshifter. Shapeshifting was a very popular in a lot of Celtic legends, especially in Ireland. You get some really interesting women turning into birds or
Hmm.
goddesses being associated with birds.
That's also very common in the Nordic stuff, right?
Super common in the Nordic stuff as well.
Hmm.
Where I mean, Odin, Loki, they're always changing shapes. Heimdallr,
Hmm.
um, people are
Possibly
always taking.
Freya and
Possibly
Frigg.
Freya, she might
I
be a
mean,
falcon
there
sometimes.
she's
Yeah.
got the thing to turn her into a falcon, but
Yeah,
it's
she
always
also has
Loki who's
some.
using it though.
I
It's
know,
like
yeah, he's always borrowing.
yeah. But then we of course
Um,
have, Valkyries that sometimes show
yeah.
up as swans, like in
Hmm.
Völundarkvida, right? Where,
Yep.
Völundar and his brothers, they fall madly in love with these swan maidens, and that's a common theme too, right?
Yeah, and that's made its way into a lot of continental and Irish fairy tales. We've got a lot of Selkie myths, so
Yes.
women turning into seals
Hmm.
in especially kind of the outer islands
Yeah.
and the
Denmark,
Highlands
Norway,
of
and Iceland also have those. Yeah.
also have Selkies, yeah.
Yeah.
Again with these otherworldly shape-shifting women. So yeah, changing form and having knowledge and
Hmm.
being the link between this world and another world and this person and this land seems to be the role of a lot of these female deities that we see. or
Hmm.
maybe not even deities, but just supernatural women
Yeah.
throughout.
So do you think that's what's also expressed in the story about Frey's, attraction together
I
in
think so. I
Skitten's
was just
mouth?
talking about this. Yeah, so that seems like both a sort of seasonal changing myth, so kind of the earth yielding to the fertility that the oncoming summer will bring, and also a sovereignty myth.
Hmm.
This idea of a man copulating with a woman who represents the land or the earth in order to have dominion over that. And in this case, I think I don't know why I have this impression, but this kind of like agricultural feel to it seems particularly present in that. Maybe just because
Hmm.
Freyr has so many fertility associations.
Well, her
Uh,
name also means, fenced off field. So,
yeah, it's kind of the
yeah,
cultivated field.
yeah,
So that I think is very prominent in that. But yeah, so I think that definitely applies. And she's threatened into it. So
yeah,
she's usually the sovereignty deities don't seem terribly unwilling. They might ask the their candidate to kind of complete tasks or perform things or select him because he showed a certain quality, but they're not usually as unwilling as Gerður.
yeah. No, that's the interesting thing, right? Well, I mean, yeah, she's like, oh, okay, so you showed up with some gold. You know what? I don't really care about that. Oh,
Hmm.
okay, now you're gonna threaten to kill my brother and father. Okay, whatever. And then he's like, okay, well, now I'm gonna whip out my magic wand and give you all these spells, and
Yeah,
Odin is angry with you, and the
make you
Alvar is gonna get
so
you, and
horny that you want to die.
yes, but you'll be
You will
living with a three-headed
sleep with
ogre,
thirst. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
and drink goat piss every day. Um, yeah,
Ouch. At that point, you're like, all right, I'm married.
fine. Chill out, bro. Yeah, so there's all of that, of course, like that's and um yeah, I think, by the way, going back to the Selkies, this might be where we actually have a little bit of a connection to Raun and
Yeah.
her nine daughters as well, right? I mean,
Mhm.
maybe um that's like the watery death realm. Maybe that's
Oh,
just
yeah.
simply another version of the underworld, right? Like,
Yeah. And
yeah.
again, the women in watery places are a big deal in a lot of these myths as well. So, to get to the underworld in a lot of legends, you have to go over water or underwater. And
Yes.
that is very cool. And that's a tradition that you see not only in the legends themselves, but kind of referenced as a known fact
Hmm.
throughout medieval and even into quite late folklore and folk tradition.
Oh yeah,
Um,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, I was looking at some poems of David ap Gwilym, who was a 14th century, I believe, Welsh poet, and he's constantly referencing Annwn as this underwater place. He writes a poem about tripping in a peat pit, and
Mm,
he says something about it being the home of the tribe of Gwyn ap Nudd, who
mm.
Gwyn ap Nudd was. He kind of replaced Arawn as the ruler of Annwn or Annwfyn, and so that kind of that allusion to this horrible pit that's tripped
Hmm.
him and his horse on his journey as being the entrance to the realm of Annwfyn, where Gwyn ap
Yeah.
Nudd rules, is a very poetic way of calling it hell, of
Yeah.
tying it to the Christian hell as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, there's so much when it comes
Yeah.
to bogs and marshes, right? In
Mhm.
the
And
north
lakes, and
and
you have all
lakes.
of these offerings thrown into lakes and
Hmm.
rivers. You have sacrifices thrown into lakes and rivers.
And that is
You've
like one
got
of the when it comes to okay, so just like we just need to mention a little bit about like the historical timeline here, right? Because
Yes.
so we have these Celtic populations, Celtic, and let's just make clear that Celtic, when we say that, we primarily are talking about a certain type of language that they're speaking.
Hmm.
They're not necessarily that homogenous in populations, right? But they do seem to have some commonalities in culture and religious outlook and so on, right? Um, and these Celtic speaking populations, we don't know exactly when they arrive at the scene in Europe, but they're basically spread throughout Central Europe and into northern Italy. And Gaul is the primary location, I would say, until the Romans really messed it up for them. So that would be France. And then we have
Hmm.
the British Isles. And we can also see, based on material evidence, that uh, at least their culture, I think also their peoples in different ways, but at least their culture definitely spreads into the southern Scandinavian area. Like we find so much Celtic stuff in
Yes.
Denmark in particular, right?
Hmm.
And what is it that these guys are doing typically when they interact with their the other world with their deities and so on? They sacrifice stuff in water, right?
Yes.
They put it in lakes, they put it in rivers and so on. And again, that's exactly what we're also seeing in southern Scandinavia. And this is a tradition that then we have the first 500 years up until the year zero is what we in the Scandinavian context refer to as like the Celtic Iron Age, right?
Hmm.
And then from there we have Roman Iron Age and Germanic Iron Age and then Viking Age, right?
Hmm.
So from the year zero and up until 700, that's Roman and Germanic Iron Age, and then we have the Viking Age, and we can see in the Viking Age, we can see that people are still heavily sacrificing in waters until they convert to Christianity, right? So this is a really important thing. And for those who weren't aware of it, most of the depictions that you see of Celtic deities out there actually come from my country of origin, Denmark,
Hmm.
from the Gundestrup chalice, this beautiful silver cauldron essentially that has these depictions of like Cernunnos as the main example, right? With the
Yeah.
horns and holding the snake and a ring,
Right back to holding snakes again.
right back to holding snakes
Yeah.
and a ring, which seems to be, the
Yep, an
sovereignty
oath ring.
symbol. Yeah.
Yes.
And by the way, we find so many of those rings too, by the way, in the people are probably familiar with the torque, right? From
Yes.
from Gaul
Very,
and Britain, right?
very Celtic imagery there,
Hmm.
and both in written sources and archaeological. And for anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's kind of a an open horseshoe-shaped collar that you would wear
Yep.
around your neck, and they can
Hmm.
be very, very elaborate.
Yes,
If
and
anyone is
massive, made of
watching,
gold, some of them.
they're kind of shaped like this. This is a
Yeah.
really small example, but that's the general look
Hmm.
you would get.
And we
Um,
got a ton of those in Danish archaeology too. Like there's like a Nordic version of this. And this is then, this ties into then later Viking Age culture, Germanic culture, where we see, oath rings being so incredibly important. And also, when we're in the Viking Age, right, what is the primary thing that you get when you're a cool skaldic poet who shows up? You come from Iceland on your ship over to Norway, you kick the door in at the king's hall, and you're like, here's an awesome poem about how cool you are. And then the king is like, ah, nice. And here's a nice little arm ring for you, right? So then it's
yep.
like they stopped carrying them around their neck and started carrying them around their arms instead, right?
Hmm.
So there's like all of these like deep connections really in the material culture as well. But that was just to say that, we have this like Celtic speaking population that spreads out over all of this like this massive area in Europe. And they seem to sort of like lay a foundation for for cultural patterns that are then later built on and reproduced in different ways by Germanic speaking populations and Slavic speaking populations as well, right?
Hmm.
The main competitor to this would be the Romans, right, who are bringing their stuff, right? So, and I mean, I think that's really fascinating to consider, like just how deep these patterns seem to go in European history.
Yes. It's really interesting. I'm teaching a course called Celtic Civ 1A, where this is exactly what I'm sort of leading the students through right now. And this week we are looking at some very interesting Celtic language inscriptions that actually mention underworlds and calling on powers from other worlds to assist them in magical endeavors. And I'm thinking specifically of the Chemalier tablets, which are
Mm,
really interesting if anyone looks those up to look more into them. But they invoke all of these names and they call on the underworld ones.
mm,
So they have a name that breaks down into like those of the under thing, like those from the underworld beings.
mm,
And they're very difficult to translate because we don't have a very large corpus of written Celtic languages, but you can see this very clear connection between magic and an underworld, and this very clear invocation of those entities of an underworld or an otherworld to assist in kind of magical knowledge or magical endeavors. And I think those tablets may have been found somewhere wet, but I'm not sure.
mm.
I'd have to go look. I know we do find so much of our archaeological things come from bogs and lakes, so it's a pretty good bet, but I'm not 100% sure about the Chemalier tablets.
Right.
But
But I mean, but that's another thing that, I think it's also quite important to consider that these bogs and lakes then continue to be this repository of knowledge and memory.
mhm,
Because, you invariably end up going through them, maybe over several rounds, actually, over the centuries. The last time Northern Europeans were digging through the bogs were, in the peat bog peat days, right? Where, we used that for fuel. And then
mhm.
all of a sudden you find, the leathery skin remains of some poor sap who got sacrificed sometime in the Germanic
You get
Iron
the
Age.
bog bodies.
Yes, like that's what
Yeah.
I'm familiar with from Denmark, right? Like,
Hmm.
they're displayed at the museums, and I remember going to the museums as a kid, and it's like, oh yeah, that's you know, grandpa over there.
Yeah, true. And they're
Everybody's grandpa.
creepily well preserved. They still
Yeah,
have their
yeah,
hair and everything. They just look a
yeah.
little deflated. But
Yeah, they essentially they look like a deflated human being. That's
mhm,
exactly what they look like, right? Like because the anoxic environment preserves the skin so well.
yeah, they don't
But
decay.
it's no, but it's so acidious that the bones will disappear, and
Mhm.
so yeah, it's pretty creepy how much they look like they were alive yesterday, essentially.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
very cool. And
yeah,
we've learned a lot from them and from other really valuable deposits in bogs because bogs preserve certain things so well that are not preserved in things like dirt and soil and other environments that we'd find.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you,
Yes.
bogs.
Yeah, thank you, Boggs. And this brings me to what you were saying about like the difficulty in translating, and it seems like they are just calling these underworldly beings essentially underworldly beings, right?
Hmm.
I mean, this is also at the core of what a lot of our, terminology in the Germanic languages is about. I mean, hell literally just means a covered place,
Hmm.
some place that you can't really see what's going on. Going back to the reference to passing through Nippelhell that
Hmm.
Vatrunja gives, right? Nippelhell means the misty covered place, right? This place that you just can't really see what's going on, and that's the whole
Can't see what's
point,
happening there. And
right?
so many other worlds are described this way, where you have these kind of like weird, ghostly, indecipherable shapes going on, and it all seems kind of vague and difficult to penetrate for someone of the mortal world or the mundane world. You see this in a lot of classical literature. Like any Greek hero who's anyone has to go to the other world and talk to usually Tiresias to
Right, yes.
get knowledge. You see this in descriptions of otherworldly journeys where they see really fantastical things or things change very quickly and they can't really make out what's going on. It's a very confusing place for someone of our world.
Yeah, for sure, right? And that's the whole point too, right? And you know, the thing about the underworld is that as Loki says in the guise of Thök, may hell keep what she has, right?
Mhm.
Like that's what they want.
Yes, no, they don't want to let go, and that's you see that with other worlds as well. And you also see time being warped so they can keep what they have. And
Oh yeah.
this is a trope that goes well into fairy tales, fairy stories. You know, don't eat anything that a fae gives you because then you'll belong to them forever. If you step into a fairy circle, you're going to come out 100 years later and everyone you know is going to be dead. So this very
Mm.
strong tradition of once you are in the other world, it's a lot harder to get out.
Yes, yeah, and we can compare that with the Icelandic folk tales about the Huldur, right? That
Yep.
will, you know, they will do whatever they can to keep you there, right? You know,
Yes.
they will chase you down and try to kill you, you know, and that's, you know, the
Right.
same sort of like a conception that like if you have entered that realm, then your chances of coming out are minimal, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I think not to bring up the Wild Hunt yet again, but in one of the French traditions, there's a king, Eliquin, who is invited to another worldly feast, goes to the feast. He's given a little dog at the feast, and his host says, "Don't dismount until this dog jumps down, otherwise, something terrible will happen to you." And so he rides back with his retinue and they arrive at their own country. And one of his men starts to recognize the country around him and he thinks he's home. So he jumps off of his horse and then they're all doomed to ride forever and they can never
Hmm.
dismount and they can never go home and they're cursed to wander. And this is very similar to the Flying Dutchman. If this cursed to wander or never allowed to return home trope sounds very familiar. And I think they
Right.
might be neighboring tale types.
It,
But
they sound like they are, yeah.
yeah, I know
And
the sleeping army that you brought up, or the sleeping giant, is
mm,
very close to the Wild Hunt and the cursed wanderer tales as well.
yes, for sure. Yeah, and you know, you also have those in you know, there's the multitude of versions of these stories of like being caught in the underworld in some kind of
Right.
capacity in a Nordic in the Nordic literature. Like Saxo's History of the Danes has this like elaborate narrative where he's this is like you know this is his magnum opus in terms of you know deconstructing paganism really because it's like this story about Thorkell or as he
Mhm.
calls him Thorkitlus because you know it's it's Latinized version, like who you know is challenged to because he's an Icelandic presumably Icelandic skald at the Danish king's court and he tells all of these tales about the old Norse gods, right? Because that was still a thing in the 1200s, sorry, in the 1200s when Saxo was writing, early
Mhm.
1200s, 1100s. It was still a thing. Skaldic poetry was still important in all the Nordic countries. And so these tales were still circulating, and this is why Saxo is writing it because he's, you know, man of the church. Um, and so he has this character, Thorkell, who gets challenged to go find the Nordic gods. And so he travels to the far north, beyond the stars, beyond the sun and the moon, into complete darkness. And that's where he finds this island with these two like eagle uh, animal creepy thingies that live in a cave, and they send him in the direction. So that's like, I don't know if it's, references to Odin or something like that,
Uh,
but they send
that's
him.
really interesting.
Yeah, no, it gets
Not to
wilder.
interrupt you, but I do
Yeah.
have some Arthurian stuff to add to that. So
Yes.
in Killich and Olwen, uh, in order to marry Olwen, it's also known as how Killich won Olwen, he has to do all of these impossible tasks that her father has set for him.
Hmm.
And Arthur helps him with this. And one of those tasks is to find a certain prisoner called Mabon, whose name we
Mm.
can also dissect linguistically if we really want to. But it means something like the divine son. And Mabon has
Hmm.
been a prisoner for time immemorial. So in order to find him, they have to go to older and older and older animals who might know where he's kept. And the very last one that they go to, I believe, is a decrepit eagle who
Yes.
lives somewhere off on a mountain or an island. So
Hmm.
not too far off from that. But this idea of a really ancient bird knowing
Hmm.
kind of where things are, where people are that have been
Yeah.
lost to time
No,
is
no, the eagle is so important, and let's just keep in mind that Odin's name, or one of his names, is Arnahöfði, which means eagle
Mhm.
head.
Mhm.
And by the way, what they find is actually Utgaraloki, or Loki,
Mm.
bound in a cave. Right. Yeah. So that's like that's like the end of
So
the journey.
cool.
But he also has to go through this underworldly city where they uh, they they squeeze through the bars, just like in the story about Thor going to Utgaraloki in
Yeah.
Edda. They have to squeeze through the bars. They're so small, and then they get into this city that's like ruled by trolls, and they're running around making all kinds of noise. They get to the main hall where the king is, and the king is the giant Geirröður that Thor vanquished. Right.
Mhm.
This is the story where Thor first fights, or in other ways, beats Geirröður's daughters because they're trying to kill him. Right. So he breaks their back. And in this story, in Saxo's version, they're sitting. He's got three daughters sitting with like broken backs, and Geirröður himself has been impaled with this massive, um, I think it's a nail, like a huge nail, and it is Thor that has done it. That's what he
Mm.
says. And so here they find all these cool riches and stuff, and some of the men take some of the riches, and like they take a drinking horn, and then that turns into like a snake that wraps itself around him and eats him. And there's I think somebody takes a spear or something that then ends up stabbing him.
Mhm.
And like, so it's like they get, enticed by things in this other world, and then they die. Right.
Yes.
And then, after that, they try to escape this whole other world, and they get to this magical realm, paradise kind of realm, ruled by Germ. His name is Gudmundur, and he offers them food and drinks and everything, and it's like, no, 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 don't eat it, because if you do, you're going to be staying here. And then he's like, hey, all right, if you don't want anything to eat, what about my daughters, huh? Are
Yes.
they could they be
Very common.
interesting? And then some of the men are like, okay, sure, I'm not going to pass on that one. And then they go mad and insane and drown
Yep.
themselves and stuff like that. And then eventually they get out of there, of course, some of them, and then they come back, and show the Danish king a piece of hair that they had taken from Loki's beard, and it stinks so much that the king dies. So that like that story also kind of like ties so many ends together, I would say,
Oh
of
my God.
like all
It's
of these.
full of like feast, seduction, magnificent cities, which you do see a lot in a lot of medieval tales of kind of the there and back again journeys or these
Mm,
quests. It has all of the elements of quests.
yeah.
And that's very interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of elements that you see in Celtic and continental stuff as well. And later, even like courtly and romantic stories, starting at about the 12th-ish century onward, and
Mm,
especially as the French got hold of Arthurian legend and started to do crazy things with that.
yeah.
If anyone's watched The Green Knight, that is
Mm,
probably, in my opinion, one of the best visual representations of a medieval tale. And they explain nothing. And that's
yeah.
exactly what you get in these tales, where
Yes.
there will be giants in the distance, never addressed, talking animals, never explained, magical objects that do things with no
Hmm.
explanation. But it's a really, really good way to kind of allow it to wash over you. And it sounds
Mm.
like a lot of that was going on in this, did you say 10th century, 11th century?
It's a
That's the
12th
writing in
century,
that's 12th century. Okay.
late 12th century,
Yeah, so
and yeah,
it seems to
and
have a
there's
lot of the popular elements of that, of those kinds of
oh yeah,
stories that were being circulated then.
yeah, and they by the way, Saxo's story about Thorkell going to the far
Mhm.
north is a direct riff on Thor mythology from that we know from Snorri Sturluson's Edda, although Snorri Sturluson
Yeah.
is writing a little later than
Mhm.
Saxo. And his story about Thor going to Utgard
Yes.
uh, that like seems to be based on a story tradition that is either directly derived from or very similar to Saxo's story tradition
Mhm.
and the story tradition of the Green Knight. Like
Yes.
there's like a direct correlation here.
Yeah.
People knew the same stories and decided to
Yeah.
tell them in with like Thor or a version, a human version of Thor in them,
Mhm.
really. So
Oh,
that's pretty
that's
cool.
And as we all know, the way to hell in Norse tradition is north and down, north of Mead.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yeah,
that
that's
makes
important. Yeah.
perfect sense. Yeah.
Right. So, I think this sort of like ends our conversation about all of these interesting otherworldly and death realms stories. There's still so much more we can say
We could
about
talk
all of
about
these
this
things.
for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. There's so much to say, and there's so many threads to pull and draw together and unravel, and it's really a very entangled web, which is what makes it so interesting, I think.
Right? Yeah. I find it fascinating too. But I think we should perhaps wrap this one up and then we can
Yes.
perhaps return to some of these things in later episodes. Awesome. Well, Amina, once again, thank you for joining us here. And thank to everybody who has been listening to this episode. I hope it was interesting, meaningful, and helpful in your further journeys.
Yes, and thanks again for having me, and thanks everyone for listening to us just have a fascinating talk to us. Hopefully, it's just as interesting to you, but it's been so much fun to be on, and I'm really looking forward to this next chapter of The Sacred Flame.
Yes, me too. All right. Bye, everybody.